So now we're starting to get into an area when we start talking about mythology, at least from my understanding, we're now starting to talk about, if you will, almost subliminal messaging, not just in our modern day marketing and advertising departments, but in terms of authors, movie makers, playwrights, or just people who are wanting to share their ideas, such as what we're doing here. The words that we're using are evoking certain images, but the images are not the same from one person to the next. No. So in a manner of speaking, Dennis, isn't it difficult to get across these ideas to the masses, shall we say, whether it be 100 or 100 million, because everybody has their own image of those symbols and that symbology? Yeah. How do you get that idea out there that you had that people can understand? It's almost like there are 3 visions of what we want to accomplish in our lives in this room. And Steve Jobs had a vision. And when he died, I said, Apple will never be the same because no one in that company has the vision he had. Mm-hmm. How do we?
Well, you give a really good, a real good foundation for the listeners, the viewers, to grasp the difference between an archetype, and that's the apple, and the specific archetypal apple that Will had for lunch. That's history. So, or let's go to your word vision. Each of us has a vision because visions are archetypal, but each of us has a specific vision that's biography and history. So, Richard, just that concept, if grasped, would help anyone entering this. Admittedly, it can be very obscure, very murky world of myth. But if people hang on to the idea that myths are patterned ways each of us uses to take in and comprehend the formlessness of events that bombard us during the day, and then the dream images that bombard us at night, because the psyche is always poetically in motion.
Yeah.
That would take people a huge quantum leap into grasping not only myth, but myths. When I teach Joseph Campbell, I like to use the image that myths, if I took my shirt off right now, no, I don't even have to take my shirt off. I can do this. I can do this as a visual. For me, this is myth. Mm-hmm. This is history. I understand myth as the inner sleeve of history. It's helping give this sleeve shape, but it's invisible unless I turn it over, and then we can see the pattern. Maybe it's reversed, or maybe it's a different pattern. So, one's personal biography, and that which is mythically inflected, dovetails with the larger social myth that each of us is in, both in Santa Barbara, West Coast, United States, and then it goes out. And then finally for Campbell, and it's even truer today, it's the new myth is the planet. I mean, its survival, her survival, is absolutely contingent on every one of us. In the past, the vision wasn't that great,
right?
But something happened with that photograph of the sun of the Earth
jewel,
rising.
They call it. The blue jewel.
The blue
something.
jewel. Yeah. I mean, that changed consciousness in an instant, and changed a kind of mythic perspective as well.
The planet has been, and this is only a word I've just started to utilize, try not to use it too much, but the Earth has basically been anthropomorphized. Is that a fair statement?
It had been for a long time, especially. I think that actually may be one of the core qualities of a lot of myths. where, for example, Jeb in the Egyptian tradition, he is the earth. Or and the Fisher King in the Holy Grail legends, some might say is healing him is to heal the land, and so with the blue jewel, I think myths. One of the demands on myths has always been to establish cohesion where there is not yet cohesion, to establish a bigger frame where a bigger frame is needed. Right now, we need to think holistically about the world as a whole, and so. Right now, that's one of the demands on myth, is to establish that as a frame that people like to see through. And I think in better ways and in worse, it's active doing that.
It is said that you can certainly kill the idea maker, but you can never kill the idea. Would the same thing be true of myth, and that if you started a myth, okay, in the context in which we're speaking here, and not just some story about some celebrity who did something, but they didn't really. I mean, that would be under a different category. And what would it have to contain to endure time?
For me, it would have to carry sufficient archetypal energy that gave it a universal heft, so that it would have duration. Without that, there's a good chance it will simply be another passing fad with a lifespan of maybe 18 months. I use this line. I cited this line in writing Mythic Writing because it really helped me understand myth. And I'm forgetting it might be Stanley Krippner, his book on myth. Anyhow, I forget. But the line is, a myth can make a cow sacred in one culture and a hamburger patty in another. Same animal, two differently inflected, one towards consumption, one's towards worship. Same animal. That brilliant sentence helped me, and so I begin one of the chapters with that as the byline, because you see, Will's term is accurate. Myths are frames; they're also verbs. So we kind of myth along every day of our lives as a kind of a gerund. Maybe
a little more than just embellishing.
Yeah, it's more than embellishing. Yeah. But embellishing is another really rich word, because I think we are constantly embellishing our history with myth. So we're fabrications, we're fictions. We're not lies. But there's a German philosopher, Hans Weichinger, wrote a book in 1922 called The Philosophy of As If. And the subtitle, which I've never accurately memorized, goes something like this, and I'm going to embellish. The historical, religious, economic, and social fictions of mankind. And in that book, heavily influenced by Immanuel Kant, is probably 150 as-if fictions that we have the capacity to live by. Well, the more I read him, the more I want to say that myths are as-if propositions that we create to help us get through the day, if not a lifetime, or especially over a crisis, the loss of a family member, a divorce, something where we really take a traumatic hit. Do we splinter and fall apart, or does the myth that we believe in help us at least stay coherent enough to heal and maybe be reassembled in the healing?
So the myth that the person is in a better place.
Or that's an example. Or say you have your own personal story, and the death of this person, while it's completely about their life, impacts you in such a way that it impacts your personal story. Yeah. So I'm active in weaving that experience into my story. And so emotions are very frequently encased within a narrative. Emotions only come because of a narrative. In fact, if I'm happy or angry with somebody, it's probably because I'm telling myself a narrative that makes me happy or angry about that. And so, I might ask you to say just a little bit about James Hillman's a way of describing soul making, because it's somewhat what we're talking about, and I know that both he and Louise Cowan are major mentors and influences on you. So
Yes.
Maybe you could say a little bit about soul making.
Yeah. 2011, the fall of 2010, by way of preamble, my wife had suffered a pretty serious stroke, and we had plans for that fall with my not teaching out here, which we then scrapped. So we needed to get her back as much to herself as is possible. So one thing that called me in that period was Jim's Revisioning Psychology, initially published in 1975. Yeah, you've got a copy there. That's great. Now talk about a mythic text. This is you can't beat his thinking, which is actually mythopoetic. It's both. And I spent 4.5 months reading that, 3.5 pages a morning, and wound up with like 135 pages of single-spaced handwritten notes. I think my handwritten notes rival the number of words in that page. But the part that gripped me was pages 99 to 104, pathologizing as mythologizing. And you could, a reader could meditate over those 5 pages. Now, Will's going to prove me right or wrong, see if my memory's working.
That's the myth section right there.
Yeah, that's it. Those pages in what he uncovers about the nature and function of myth is, number one, worth the price of the book. And number two, you could read and reread those 5 pages for the next several years, being provoked into new ways of thinking about how myth is. Another line from Jim's book, since we have it out on the table, page 71 or 77. Will's going to check me and catch me now. The soul can do without its therapists, but it cannot do without its afflictions. For James, we grow, we become most mythical when we're suffering. It's not that we have to go out and look for it. Life will
bring it to us. Yes.
in platters sometimes, in horrific ways. But when we're knocked off the normative and the conventional place that we all like to inhabit most days, because it lets us get things done. But when pathology enters our life, all bets start becoming questionable. And it's in those moments that the myth that we're in may have its best opportunity to be reformatted, restructured.